Okay, and we're live. Webinar will be starting in a minute. We'll let all the latecomers dial in, then we'll get started after that. I wish we had some background music we could put on, but I don't think there's an option like that in GoToWebinar. Okay, so it's top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. As others join in, I'm sure they'll catch up. My name is Eli. I'm VP of Sales here at Illimity. We actually had quite a few registrations for this webinar today, but some people have told us upfront they won't be able to make it. So for that reason, we are recording the webinar, and we'll be sending the recording out to everyone who's registered later today or maybe tomorrow. And if you don't get the recording and you want it, please reach out back to us. We'll provide that. One administrative item, if you have any questions, either now or as we go through the presentation and demo, just use the questions field that you should be able to see in the control panel, and yeah, just post question there. We'll get to it during Q&A. So what's going to happen is I will provide a brief overview of this webinar, the topic, the agenda, and then turn it over to Martin. And so the reason we chose this topic today, the topic is improve your IAM with identity data analytics, is because we see a big shift in how organizations approach this topic of identity data. And it starts with the problem, right? And the problem is experienced and described in different terms, different ways, but it boils down to the same core challenge, the increasing demand for understanding the meaning of the identity data. So, for example, seemingly simple questions like which users can access which resources, which user accounts shouldn't even be there anymore, right? Orphan accounts. Which users have elevated permissions, and how are these permissions granted? What do these roles and groups mean, and so on and so on. So this increasing demand for this type of information, what happens is that it takes generic data solutions to the breaking point. And again, that's something you see all the time in large organizations where you have teams that are using Excel spreadsheets to try and clean up data just as an ongoing effort, or maybe before an IGA rollout. Or when you see generic database or data lake solutions that they couple with Power BI or other dashboard tools to try and monitor identity and access management KPIs, or when significant time and effort is spent to add a column to an IGA report. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in all of this, and they add up, to the point where the status quo is not sustainable, and the approach to mitigate these challenges is called an integrated identity analytics. And so we're here today with Martin Decat. He is co-founder and product owner at Illimity, and he's going to address this topic in more detail. So he will talk about the need for identity insights, fragmented reporting versus integrated analytics, and what's the difference between the two. Then we'll do a demo to cover a few specific use cases, and then, as I've mentioned before, we have time for Q&A after that. So with this, I turn it over to Martin.
Okay, thank you, Eli. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. To start off, let's take a small step back. All of us here today are IAM experts involved with identity and access management on a daily basis, and so we're involved with managing who can access what. And I'll be mainly talking about workforce IAM. And one visualization that I recently saw that I like a lot is this one here. This really sums up the ever-expanding world of IAM. We have more systems, we have more users, and we have more security requirements every passing day. And I think that's well understood and acknowledged by the experts. But what is maybe less understood is the impact that this has on the amount of identity data and the amount of data questions that IAM teams are faced with as well. And similarly, this increase is threefold. There are more sources of identity data, there are more questions about identity data, and there are more people asking these questions. And to give some examples like the ones on the slide here, these questions can be very operational, like a system owner that has to understand who exactly can access their application across all entitlements and roles in the IGA system, or an IAM expert who has to create a role for a team or figure out why a certain employee cannot log in, those kinds of things. But on the other hand, these questions can also be much more strategic, like security experts that need to report on orphaned accounts or admin users or password policies, or an auditor that needs to know who can access financial data, or even a CIO that wants to know whether he's not paying too much Microsoft licenses. The point that I'm trying to make here is that this list of data questions related to identity data, user data, access data, that list is immense these days, and it will only increase in the future. And one important point here, notice that these data questions and security controls are not process questions. They're not concerned with, has everyone filled out their access reviews? That's covered very well with IGA solutions, but instead, these are data questions about who can currently access what in your actual as-is infrastructure. And many IAM teams are having a hard time answering these questions. It's like Eli said, in practice, we often see sysadmins that are running PowerShell scripts that then produce Excel sheets that are shared via email, leads to lots of people doing the same work all over again. Or if you have an IGA, then these come with some pre-built reports, but the challenges then are whether this IGA contains all the data, whether it's connected to all the systems that you want insights in. And even in that case, even if you have that case, even then, those reports are hard to customize. And again, it's Excel sheet juggling. And then, like Eli said as well, we've encountered a few highly mature IAM teams that built their own data lakes specifically for IAM analytics with technologies like Power BI or Tableau. That's a very, well, at least a much better approach because the data is automatically kept up to date, etc. But it's also very expensive. And because of that, still these companies focus on just a few core IAM controls. And again, this just does not support the endless number of queries that all of the user groups that you see here on the right of this slide that we have in IAM. So that's the status quo that we see in practice. And of course, that doesn't have to be a problem per se for you in practice. However, it's not sustainable, and we do see more and more IAM teams running into the limits of this fragmented reporting approach. For example, we've encountered companies that do have an IGA, it's partially deployed, but they still receive audit findings on not having proper visibility in their user access. So they're looking for a way to get more visibility in disconnected systems. We've seen IAM leaders that have purchased an IGA, like a SailPoint or One Identity, but roll out blocks on the cleanup of current users or on setting up a proper entitlement catalog. We've seen companies that don't have the opportunity to deploy an IGA because they're a small security team or a very complex organization. They're not at that maturity stage yet. And they're doing their ad hoc reporting as a form of lightweight governance, but the effort just keeps growing and growing over time. So they're looking for a more sustainable solution. Or even very mature IAM teams that run all the governance processes, but where the system owners and everyone involved still complain that they actually have no idea what they're approving. So those are all examples that we see, so cases that we see in practice, where people start to look at something more than just the ad hoc approach of a reporting. Now, the good news is that this problem of fragmented reporting has already been solved in the data industry with an approach that is called integrated data analytics. So first of all, this makes a step from reporting to analytics, but secondly, you also structure and properly set up the collection of data and combine this with an easy to use platform that everyone can use to get answers to their questions themselves without someone else having to prepare a report or prepare a dashboard or something like that. And at Alimity, we provide such a data platform specifically designed for identity and access management because we strongly believe that IAM has specific requirements there. It's very complex data, graph data from a technical perspective. There are several forms of analytics that are specific to IAM that the other generic platforms having a hard time to provide and so on. And so Elimity was founded 5 years ago. Our platform is called Elimity Insights. You'll hear that term multiple times during this webinar, and it's used by CISOs and IAM leaders of companies from several thousands of employees up to hundreds of thousands. And in essence, the platform turns this situation here that we saw before into this picture. So that means that Elimity Insight applies the same reasoning as, for example, Power BI, but with specific support for IAM, meaning that it makes it a lot easier to understand IAM data like users, roles, employees, and so on, by clicking through what is contained in a role and what are the linked entitlements and so on. It automatically keeps this data up to date, so people are always working with recent data. It supports IAM specific forms of analysis like outlier detection, role mining, peer review, separation of duty analysis in the near future as well. It can actively monitor key controls and alert you if needed. And then if you want to deploy this at scale, it even provides security features to enforce who can see which data, because this is security and privacy relevant data. Not everyone probably should be able to see everything. And finally, if you want to, the platform can even be used for governance, a lightweight form of governance through the features of change requests and access reviews based on the same always up-to-date data foundation. So depending on your use case, you would either plug this platform on top of your existing IJ if you have one, and then maybe, or if you don't have an IJ, also connect it to other systems directly, like Active Directory, SaaS applications, or even unstructured data like file shares or SharePoint or Teams and so on. And importantly there, because this is a read-only system and also an analytics system, these connectors are far easier to set up than a two-way connector for an IGA system. We do not try to automatically provision and correct incorrect data, but rather this is reporting analytics, meaning that the Elimity Insights is typically set up and connected to your top 5 systems in a matter of hours, at most days. That's really what we're aiming for, making it economically viable if you want to get these insights and use them early on in your IGA process or to clean up data and so on. So as a result, this platform is interesting to companies of all IAM maturities. To give some examples, we have customers that don't want to deploy a full IGA, but they still need to prove that they're in control. Like an 800 people organization with a very small security team and budget, but also up to a 120K people organization that is heavily international and very complex, and automating the joiner mover leaver workflows would be far too much hassle for that situation. And so in those cases, the Elimity platform provides a way to set up this needed visibility and governance at a far lower cost. We drop, well, in IGA feature terms, we drop the provisioning. You can always add that for your core systems with like Azure AD or something like that, but you still need full visibility and governance for all of your systems, and that's what our platform allows you to set up at a much lower cost. That's an example on the left side of this slide where people do not have an IGA in place yet. On the other hand of the spectrum, we have customers with very mature and extensive deployments of IGAs like an Omada or One Identity, and that want to provide better information to all the people involved in IAM to save time and money. And one example there is a company, a bank, 36K employees, and there over 500 application owners and role owners and IAM experts use Elimity Insights on a daily basis on top of their One Identity deployment. And I'll show you some examples later on during the demo of the things that these people do in the platform. And then, of course, there are many variations between both these extremes. We have customers that are preparing to deploy an IJ. For example, a 30K people governmental organization. They use the platform to clean up the current users, their old IJ, permissions in AD and so on, and design roles early in the process to speed up this whole deployment. We also have customers that focus on security value. Like one example is an international pharma company. They use Elimity Insights to detect and monitor user access risks in their IJ, but also in disconnected applications. In this case, including database owners, database users, Windows file shares, and SharePoint, and other disconnected, more structured applications as well. And then similarly, there are organizations that need identity analytics for reasons like facilitating a merger of multiple IAM domains, or to monitor the downstream data flow from IAM data from HR to the target systems across their IJ. Those are all specific use cases why an organization needs more than just ad hoc reporting. And those are all use cases where we're involved in. So as I understand, we have an audience here that that covers multiple of these use cases. So this is an overview of what we mean with identity analytics and why you would use an identity analytics platform. And so that being said, let's take a look at what the Alimity platform actually looks like. And I'll try to give you some examples of how the platform is actually used in these different cases. So I'll try not to smack you down with features. I'm not going to go through the whole platform, but I'll really try to make it very concrete, give specific examples of how people use this platform. And across the whole story, I will go over the 4 major parts of the platform. And that's first getting insights in your identity data, so queries from the point of view of these multiple users. Then letting Alimity Insights also monitor key controls. Thirdly, that people can indicate necessary changes in the data. So if they see an account that should be removed, or an attribute that should be changed, or a group or a role that should be added or revoked, to indicate that and then integrate these changes with your ITSM system. And then finally, the last part here, also how you actually get data into Alimity Insights and how we get that threshold really as low as possible. So that being said, let me click to this tab here. So what you see here is a demo environment of Alimity Insights with examples that we've seen across multiple customers. So here on the left side, you see the different sources that are included in the platform for which data is loaded into the platform. In this case, there are 11 such data sources. And of course, these are just examples of sources that we've seen many times. In your case, if you would deploy Alimity Insights, you would see data sources that are important for you. Meaning that if you want operational insights on top of your IJ and only that, you would only see something like one identity here with users and business roles and technical roles and so on. If you're looking for the lightweight governance, you don't have an IJ yet, then probably you will connect one or several Active Directories and then look at the users and the groups and the computers in there, and probably also Azure AD and Azure maybe itself as well. Cloud applications like GitHub, Windows file shares with the permissions to different file shares, files and folders and so on. It depends on where your priorities are. Those are the applications that you would like to get in here. And then in most of the cases, we also advise you to import data from the HR system so that you have the authoritative list of all of your employees and interesting metadata as well. And then link back all of the users, the accounts from the different systems to this central employee record. So you can see, well, this is the person, this is the metadata, like place in the organization, whether it's still active, the end date that is coming up, the manager name and so on, and then see that in one identity, this person has one user and 11 business roles. Or one user in Active Directory and 16 groups. And then if you want, what are those groups? Look into that. And if you want to click through, then go deeper into the details. But starting from the HR perspective really makes sense in most use cases. So once you have all of the data in place, the next step is to also get the insights that you need. And before I go deeper into that, important to understand is this is a self-service analytics platform. This is not a reporting platform, meaning that you don't have to prepare a report for someone else to consume. The idea is that all of the users that you have that need data insights, you give them access to one or more of these sources, and they should be able to use the system themselves to come up with questions that they have in their day-to-day jobs. Of course, you can store queries or controls so that you can prepare this work for others and share that then with others as well. I'll go deeper into that later on, but you don't have to. And then Secondly, important to understand is that this is an analytics platform, meaning that we don't automatically provision things. So you will not see provisioning workflows here. This is really gathering the data and making sense of that data. And in the terms of making sense, the platform provides three ways to do that. The first are these tables that you see me using here. I'll go deeper into that later on. Then we have the more advanced query engine, and then there are more IAM specific forms of analysis like peer review, which I'll show you as well. But let me walk you through that from the point of view of these users that I mentioned before. So as a first example, let's say that you're an IAM expert and you want to investigate why someone cannot do their jobs. You see this ticket being raised that some employee cannot do their jobs, and let's say I'm going to use my own name here. You have this one here, Maarten Bouwen. You're looking into that. Why wouldn't it be that he cannot do their job? Let's look at this. This is the employee. You look him up. Then you see that in Active Directory, there's one user. Let's click through there, and you see based on the metadata that apparently, sorry, I have to scroll up a bit. This is the metadata for the Active Directory user. Is he still active? Is he still enabled? Yes, that's still the case, so that's fine. But maybe let's click through to the users, to the groups, sorry. Then you can see, well, apparently he doesn't have the groups to log into a laptop or something like that, and then you can figure that. That's really how you move your way through the data in a very, very easy example. As a second example, imagine that you're a security expert, so completely different point of view. You don't have an IGA yet, and this is the first time that you are seeing this data. So it's the first time we have set up this data integration. You have the HR system, you have Active Directory and Azure AD in there, maybe the Windows file shares. Then typically what these people do to get a sense of the quality of their data, of the problem that they're faced with, is something like, well, these are the employees, what attributes do we have? Maybe let's group on status. And then you see, well, we have, what was it, 5,000-ish employees, 2,200 are still active, 1,222 are retired. If I dig into that, let's quickly add the column of Windows file share resources, for example. I'll add the count there. And then you can see that, well, as we expect, most of these employees cannot access Windows file shares, again. But if I then quickly sort, apparently there's still one guy, Frank Lalu, something like that. And apparently he can still access 392 resources on the file shares. If you want to see which ones, I'll quickly go into details there, and you have this table. It's now loading for a few seconds, but you have the table here. And you can see which parts he can still access, and then go into the details there. So that's what we see, that if you get visibility, this is the type of things that a system administrator or a security expert would try to dig into. The same with Active Directory users, how many people haven't changed their password in the last 6 months, or how many users aren't active anymore, haven't logged in the last 12 months, stuff like that. And by the way, two important things about these file shares that you see here. The first thing that I want to highlight is that this is something that goes beyond what an IGA would be able to do. I haven't seen anyone that successfully imported like file shares on a large scale into an IGA. It's very hard to model those permissions as entitlements at a larger scale. And secondly, it looks very easy that we have these linked resources for an employee here. But actually, this is quite complex, because an employee isn't linked to a file directly. What actually happens behind the scenes is we have these files and folders, the resources here. They are linked to a permission, like a read or write, and that is given to a principal, it's called at the technical level. That principal, if you look in the details, that's just a large number, which actually refers to something in Active Directory, like a user based on the SID, and those users are then linked to HR employees. So all of that logic is done behind the scenes, and in that sense, Limited Insights can very quickly give you an overview of, if you go from HR employee to Active Directory user to principal to permission to file shares, then apparently these people have access to so many resources. And To give you a different example, a very similar type of complexity also occurs in many IGA systems, because you have users, and those users then typically have something like business roles that then contain technical roles, that then contain entitlements, and that are then linked to applications. And the business roles can contain technical roles, but can also contain entitlements directly and stuff like that. So in that sense, it's again very hard to see who can now actually do what. And so imagine that you're an application owner, and you want to see, well, this is your application. Typically, these people only get information about their entitlements, and maybe also, if you use a typical three-layered role-based model, they see which entitlements and which technical roles contain their entitlements. So in this case, you see that the application one thought has 187 defined entitlements that are apparently taken up into 18 different technical roles that then are linked to apparently 61 business roles and that are then assigned to almost 8,000 users. And in this data set, this example data set, the metadata about these users in the IGA system is quite limited. But then the link with HR really shines, because then you can see, let me scroll down a bit, then you can see, apart from just the list of names, because it's a large number, you can also see what are their managers. Let's group by manager number, for example. And does that make sense? Similarly, what cost centers are they? Which job function are they? Which department do they come from? That's very easy to then see, well, this cost center doesn't really make sense. Go into the details there. If you see something that should be fixed, who is the manager, and really make it actionable. That's the way that you make sense of this identity data with these tables. And so what you have seen me do now really is like clicking through, filtering, grouping, lots of grouping. This is deliberately made as a sort of, let's say, Excel on steroids, because this is the magic or the ease of use that you need for non-technical people to also find their way through this maze of very, very complex data. There are two steps that go beyond just these tables, like the query and the peer review. And to give you some examples there, let me also give you some examples from the security perspective. I have a separate slide on that, because security is one of the main reasons why people look at a platform like ours. And we have a very extensive guide on that. And so the type of controls or KPIs that you would put into a system like Elimity is something like orphaned accounts, where you're looking at accounts that shouldn't be there, privileged accounts, where access accumulation, where people can do too much, and so on, separation of duty as well, data quality, whether everyone has a manager assigned, and so on. And so let me give you some examples around these orphaned accounts. That's typically one of the first things that people will look at if they see this data for the first time. And there are various varieties or versions or examples of orphaned accounts, very specific queries. And one of the first things, like I mentioned before, is you have Active Directory. Now, sysadmin takes a look at this and immediately goes looking at, well, you have this attribute last logon here. Let me scroll to it. If you just sort, if you sort here, you immediately see that apparently there are still accounts here that haven't logged in more than 10 years. Are they still enabled? Well, let me scroll to the left a bit. Yes, apparently in this case they are enabled. To give you some more specific answers, how many of these accounts have a last logon that is before what should I do? January 1, 2020, so more than 3 years ago. Apparently 4,000 in this data set, and let me then group by enabled. And then you quickly see where there are risky accounts. Well, in this data set, everything is enabled, and that's how you would dig into there. That's again using just the tables. Similarly, what I could have done as another form of orphaned accounts is look at the link to the HR system. So let's say I'm looking at the accounts in Active Directory, and I want to see whether they are linked to an HR employee. In general, just a HR employee. And then you see that some of them are not linked to HR employees. How can that be? And if they are enabled, aren't these then orphaned accounts that should be removed from your system? And to go one step deeper into that, and an example of a more extensive query, what you could do here is find, for example, Active Directory users for which, let's say, enabled equals true, but they are also linked to an HR employee for which the status is not active. So we had status active, retired, and inactive, I think it was. So not active. And in that case, this is more complex that you can do with the tables. In that case, again, you have the answers here at the tip of your fingers. And apparently, with just a few clicks, we know that in this data set, it's 2,739 different Active Directory accounts. And if you then look and group by manager, you would be able to start acting on this very easily. And this again is a very basic example of what you can do with this query language. But really here you have the power of the platform on your fingertips. You can look at directly linked entities, not linked to something else, whether another object exists with the same email address or something like that. You can combine with ands and or thing, check whether something is assigned or adhere to a certain pattern. This really is where you can do, well, where you should be able to do any query that you want on the data. If you have the data in a limited insight, you should be able to query it. And then finally, we have more specific examples, more specific forms of analysis that are specific to identity and access management. One of them is the peer review, where you compare two sets of resources to each other and look at the links. To make that specific, imagine that you're looking into, again, based on the security, you're looking into the access accumulation. And you want to see where people can do a lot more than their direct colleagues. So let's say that you're looking at all of the people of a specific cost center. So I'm quickly grouping on cost center. Let me look at one that I know that has some interesting examples in it. So cost center 001, there's apparently 25 people in that cost center. And let's say that we're looking at the linked Active Directory groups. So let me add the column of the overview of the linked groups. You can see the groups of these people here, but what I'm actually looking for is this looking glass icon here. And then in a few clicks, you get to an overview like this. So apparently these 25 people of this single cost center are linked to 76 different AD groups, and the distribution looks like this. So this is something that we see in practice a lot. This is the sorting of the Active Directory groups by frequency, and you always see that there is some commonality, as you would expect. So imagine that you're looking at this data from the perspective of role mining, and you had the idea of creating a role for this specific cost center, and probably you would put everything that is above a certain threshold. I would then advise to use a threshold higher than 52%, but still everything above a certain threshold, put that in the role and just assign it to everyone. If you're looking at this picture from a security perspective, from a risk perspective, then these things are the interesting ones, because it's in almost any customer that we have done this visualization, you see stuff like this, where certain people can do way more than their direct colleagues, and that's almost always the result of people moving throughout the organization, being added more and more permissions when they need that for their new jobs, but never revoking the old ones. And so in this case, if you're looking to clean up your accesses and go towards least privilege, then a question to the manager of this cost center could definitely be, hey, is it really that Aurélie Quantum needs all of these AD groups as the only one in their team? Because that's probably an outlier that you can clean up. That's an example of a more specific IAM sort of visualization or analytics. And we actually noticed that people were downloading data from our platform into Excel and doing this analysis in Excel. And if we notice that, then we try to add a better solution for analysis in our platform directly. And similarly to this visualization, we also have a visualization for separation of duty coming up in the near future, where you see the amounts of people that are assigned to a combination of two Active Directory groups or business roles or whatever type of data that you have. For example, to not focus on looking for toxic combinations if a combination between two business roles isn't assigned to at least one user in the first place. So not waste time on that. That's a use case why we're adding that feature. So what I've given you now is an overview of all of the insights that you can get from the platform, with the tables, with the query engine, with the peer review. If I quickly go back to this picture here, so I've now covered quite some time on oh sorry, that's too fast, on easily understanding who can access what. But as I said up front, the platform goes beyond just analysis as well. If you have controls that are important for your organization or your team, then you can also write them down and store them in the platform, so that you don't have to repeat yourself every time and time again. Let's say that you are looking into orphaned accounts and you have a control for admin AD accounts linked to inactive employees. The control is find users for which the user admin equals true, or the name contains ADM or something like that, and it's linked to an employee for which the status is not active. You store this in the system, and from that point on, the system will track the evolution of the number of results over time, but also give you the details of these changes over time, and show you the current set of results in a few clicks away. So that's a very powerful way of, well, first of all, not repeating yourself every time and time again, but also tracking the KPIs that are interesting for you. And so if you look at this set here, these are mostly from a security perspective, but we have customers that look at security KPIs. Other ones are cleaning up an Active Directory in an Active Directory migration. They want to see the number of groups go down, or the number of entitlements in some IGA from a disconnected or a discontinued system, and make sure that those are cleaned up. Whatever KPI is important to you from a security or a management perspective, you put it in here as a stored query, and those typically are also the things that you would put on your dashboard. So you really here have an overview of how well or how bad you are doing and how everything is evolving. That's the second part of Illimity, the monitoring over time. And by the way, you can also configure these stored queries to send out alerts to email or Slack or Teams or something, so that you don't have to check for important evolutions on a daily basis, but you can get notified where you do your work as well. For example, a recent customer has set up monitoring access to or memberships of very critical AD groups, because they did have an IGA, but people were still going around it and adding stuff. So they wanted to make sure, for compliance reasons towards one of their most important customers, that they had an extra layer of safety rails, if you want, and monitoring, so they get notified and can fix things very, very quickly if the typical process isn't followed. And then finally, fourthly, sorry, the point 4 here that I want to highlight is that is another form of where we go beyond just analytics. So if you see stuff in here that shouldn't be there, like let's say these admin AD accounts linked to inactive employees, you're going through the analysis and you see that this account here, well, it really shouldn't be there anymore, or something else should change. Now you can also indicate this change directly in the platform, meaning that you can indicate whether an object like a group or a user or an HR record should be removed as a whole, or you can indicate that an attribute should be changed. So let's say that the city isn't correct, or that this one shouldn't be enabled anymore, and then you indicate that this one should be disabled now. Or a certain assignment, really on every level of the data, you can say that you want to remove something, delete something, add something, change something, and then all of those things are listed here in the platform as what we call change requests. So these are all the change requests that are made by any admin that has access to Illimity. And by the way, if you're thinking back at the example of the bank in which 500 people are looking at this data through the eyes of Illimity, then this is a very, very powerful feature, because now 500 people can also indicate necessary changes. It doesn't have to be that you're immediately fixing all of that, but just gathering all of these changes also shows you trends or where you should fix certain things in your provisioning workflow maybe, or in your data workflows where things are not correct. And that's again then a very powerful statement. If you have these change requests, and every time that the data is reloaded, the platform will automatically look at whether the change request hasn't been fulfilled. So for example, if a manager indicated that a certain AD group should be just removed, and if it's actually not present anymore in the data, this status here will automatically change from open to resolved, really giving you data-driven audit proof. So from the other business case, the governance perspective, what we now have actually covered is the fact that you can easily integrate all of this data into one data foundation. You can make sense of that data and see where there are risks, indicate necessary changes to clean up those risks, and actually prove at the very end of the flow that you have done the work and that it's actually fixed. And that's a very, very powerful but lightweight and which I mean a very easy way for closed loop governance, we call it. And regarding that governance, the final feature, but I'm not going to go into too much detail in this webinar, is the access reviews. So everything that you see me do here really is meant for the security experts, the IAM experts, people that understand all of this complex data. But for example, at some point, they probably don't have all the answers anymore. If you're a large organization, you might want to involve someone else. And so you can also send out access reviews. Again, we saw people doing that by exporting Excel sheets and then sending Excel sheets to people within the organization. Then a better solution probably is that you can create an access review here in Alimity, for example, of this is what was it? The employee group assignments, which was sent to myself. It's a view similar to the peer review that I showed you before, and then people can indicate for their team, for their application, for their scope within this complete data set, whether things are correct or should be changed. And again, if people indicate necessary changes to assignments or accounts that should be removed or something, then again, these are turned into the same change requests that you saw before. Again, the platform will automatically track the progress on that, the status of that. And by the way, you can also configure the system to automatically forward these changes to a system that is used by the admins that can actually make changes like ServiceNow or an ITSM system like Jira, or even an IJ if you automatically want to fix those changes. But again, this is a reporting platform. We don't do that provisioning ourselves. That's not our role in the marketplace. And now I've covered all of the things on the right-hand side of this picture. Very briefly, how you actually get data into the platform. We do that in multiple ways. So to set up the data, you have to set up connectors. It's a bit of a bad word in the IAM space, I think, but of course we work with connectors again. We have our library of out-of-the-box connectors that we are constantly expanding. If we see something that has been asked by more than 2 customers, then we add it here, especially for the usual suspects like Active Directory, AWS, Azure AD, Google Cloud, GitHub, and so on. But very importantly is the fact that all of our customers have custom applications, have applications that we have never heard about, have on-premise applications, legacy applications, and so on. And so all of our customers also heavily support on custom connectors, we call them, in which we, like one identity is a custom connector in this demo dataset, in which one of our engineers works together with someone that understands the authorization model of the application and defines the data that we will extract from the application. In this case, it was about users, business roles, technical roles, and so on. And those users have the following attributes, so columns in the tables that you saw before. And from that point on, the server knows which data to expect, and you can open up the API to write a custom connector to upload the data. You can import from CSV, which is a feature that we use heavily during the first stages, like a proof of concept or the first stage, to get to visibility very easily and then work towards a continuous deployment later on. So that's really how we get that threshold of gathering that data as low as possible. And our goal really is to have the top 5 of your applications into this system within days. Okay, and that's an overview of the whole platform. I hope it made sense. So what I've discussed now is, well, the need for identity visibility that we see in the market and the need for identity analytics and what the platform specifically does and how people can use it. As I understand it, the audience today had various use cases. So going from on top of a one identity to lightweight governance for very complex organizations, everything in between. So I hope that I gave everyone a bit of information on how you could use that platform in your specific situation. If you want to learn more, by all means, take a look at our website. There are very interesting customer cases and guides there, for example, on how to prove that you're in control. And if there are questions, we still have 15 minutes left. So Eli, if you have questions, then let's go into details here.
Yeah, we
I'm
have
going
quite a few.
to turn on the light for a moment. Sorry.
We can see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
yeah, quite a few questions actually from the audience, and so let's start with one that's not sure if we addressed it already or not, but is Illimity available as a managed service? The question is Illimity available as a managed service or only self-deployed?
Both. If you mean managed service, yeah, we have managed on-premise deployments, of course, but we also have a full cloud deployment. And we have customers, well, actually, most of our customers go for the on-premise deployment because most of the organizations that we work with still have lots of on-premise legacy custom applications. And then it makes more sense to bring the software from our perspective to the data. Makes it easier to connect to Active Directory if you have that on-premise and so on. And for several organizations, it was also a security requirement that this data really stays in their own premises, and then we do it on-premise. It's very easy to set up, again, a couple of hours. If you're a SaaS first application organization, then the SaaS version probably is a lot more cost efficient for you to set up. So we do both.
Okay, perfect. Next question is, how deep into the cloud platforms do you reach with Illimity? Is it just users and groups or also project roles and assets?
Cool question. I'm not sure which system the person is thinking of. I'm not sure where, what was it? Project roles come up?
Project roles, assets.
Yeah, okay. But to give an example here, so we get this question a lot regarding the Microsoft ecosystem, for example. And so the first example there was that that a customer wanted Active Directory and of course Azure AD, and those are the basics. So from Azure AD you can get the users, the group, the service principals. That's really the IAM store there. But then at some point you probably want to go a bit deeper, and so at some point we developed the Azure connector, which goes deeper into the cloud things. So like principals, roles, and subscriptions. And eventually that's where the point where we can also add virtual machines and all of that. We've recently also released Office 365 connector that actually goes deeper into SharePoint, where you see individual sites with the permissions on those sites. And then of course, those link back to the principles that you have in Azure AD. So that's how you would link those three connectors to each other. And that's how we continuously keep expanding based on customer requests. And by the way, something that I find very interesting, you clearly see the gray zone between unstructured and structured data. Because in the marketplace, you have the IGAs that are very, very focused on the structured data, like Active Directory and so on. But they don't work very well for like file shares or SharePoint. But then you have something like Varonis that is very much focused on SharePoint and Windows file shares, but doesn't really have this HR data in there and the link to the other systems and so on. And we, by our focus on identity analytics, we actually become something that does a bit of both. If you want unstructured data in there and structured data, by all means combine it, because that's where the real power of this visibility is, that you can see what someone can do across all of your systems, whether it's SharePoint sites or an Active Directory group or teams and repositories in GitHub. Whatever you have, you should be able to put in there. That's really our vision, our goal.
Okay. So staying on the topic of linking different systems together, one of our attendees has a question um, which I think we've come across quite a bit. Um, so the question is, have you worked with customers who are completely missing AD group and application owner mapping in CMDB? How do you proceed in such scenarios, and how do you map the group to the correct application and create an access review model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, so yeah, we have seen, we have worked with those types of that kind of organizations a lot. That's really, if you look back to this slide here, let me go back for a moment with all the use cases. That's really an organization that is on the left side of this slide, and so in that case, data is crucial. That's at least why we exist. But still, it's an important or a difficult question to get right. So what we then do is you don't want to start Excel sheet juggling. You really want to see the current groups and the current HR system and try to link as good as possible. But in the end, it's still largely a human effort. You can deduce certain things from descriptions, from maybe you have some group naming conventions in there. That's really why you would use a platform like Alimity to dig into the data and see where you have the low hanging fruit and then start assigning that to owners and to applications. And then you work your way through this entitlement catalog if you want. You would look at groups that you don't know yet what they belong to. If they are not assigned to any user, then just throw them away. That's what I've seen people do. If they are assigned to someone, take a look at do those people know what it means and so on. That's really how you use data to structure this approach. In the end, it's still a heavy exercise. I'm not going to say that it's super easy, but do it to focus your priorities. Use this data to focus first on the low-hanging fruit and then work your way up to the harder things. And one example that we've seen recently, it wasn't Active Directory, but it was a cleanup of SAP IDM, SAP IDM. They had lots of entitlements in there that haven't been cleaned up in the last 15 years, I think, with entitlements that represented groups in other Active Directories that had been decommissioned by then and so on. And so there, again, a dashboard was created, KPIs were created of the different forms of entitlements that could be cleaned up. The Alimity Insights was used as a communication platform so that all of the people involved in this cleanup were talking about the same things. And then once things were deleted, you could actually see the graphs go down very steeply and show to management that you have made progress there and that the total amount of entitlements is cleaned up. And you could do the same with groups in AD that hadn't been assigned an owner and make a KPI from that. That's really why you use an analytics platform like this in practice.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and by the way, if any questions, follow-up questions remain, please feel free to reach out to us. We can just have a quick conversation in the coming days or next week to review this in more detail. There is another question that I wanted to get to before we conclude the webinar. We have an enterprise data lake team and strategy. How does your approach fit within that framework?
Okay, cool question. A question that we've recently had actually. In two ways. So this here is an integrated analytics platform specifically for one part of the organization, so for IAM. So the first reaction maybe is it doesn't really fit together, but it fits together really nicely because if you have the data that you would like to have in Alimity Insights already in your data lake, like we've had at a major customer, there we would just connect to the data lake and you would build on the effort that you've already done. We're not going to set up additional connectors, of course. And then this really is an analytics environment, easy to use, more easy to use for all of the IAM related questions than, for example, Tableau or Power BI. And you could reuse or improve the ROI of your data lake. If you don't have this data, the data that you would like that you have or would like to have in Alimity already in your data lake, then by all means use the out of the box connectors that we provide, and then also funnel that data into the data lake, which will still improve your data lake, but make it a lot easier and faster to collect that data. Those are the two ways that we see both approaches working together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay. And then the last question I think we'll be able to get to is, so the question is about integration, right? And I think a lot of our a lot of conversations we've had indicate that people are always looking at the problem like this, and they're saying, wait, but we've already done a lot of work. We've already integrated our current IGA solution with some sources, maybe not all, but a lot of sources of identity data. Um, are you then suggesting, the question is, that we do this work again with Elimity now?
No, no, no. If that's part of the message, that's not what I wanted to get across. So, but of course, it depends on your use case. If you just want, or if the data in your IGA suffices to answer the questions that you have, the data questions, then just connect to your IGA and let people look at that. But for example, we recently talked to a very, very large organization, and they had a very complex IAM landscape with lots of different systems, multiple IGAs actually. In that case, they had lots of well, data problems with synchronization between Active Directory and Azure AD going wrong because there were still multiple or duplicate email addresses in there, but that actually was the result of something upstream in the HR system or other system that went wrong. Yeah, if that's your case and you want to compare the IGA data with target systems or with source systems, then of course you would have to have your IGA system itself and those other systems in order to compare both here in the limited insights. And finally, if you're looking at it from a security perspective, probably what you want is to get as much as possible from your IGA and then only connect to other applications directly if they're not in the IGA yet. So you complement or you expand your data visibility beyond what the IGA already has. And in that case, the major value of a limited insights is that a connector takes a couple of days to set up at most for a custom application. If it's out of the box, a couple of hours, I would say, which is a lot less than the costly application that you typically see in an IGA.
Yep. Yep. Okay. That's all the questions that we had for today. But I want to thank the audience for being active, for providing those questions. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
And if something's not clear, right, or if something or we didn't answer someone's question, please reach out to us directly. We'd be happy to respond either on email or we can set up a conversation. So with that said, again, thank you for attending. With this, we will conclude the webinar. And thank you, Martin, for delivering a demo and a presentation that were very clear.
Yeah, thank you. See you guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.